Salutare, dragi prieteni! Trăgeți-vă mai aproape de dumneavoastră popcornul pentru că urmează să urmărim împreună cel mai recent videoclip al lui Alex de la History Legends. O să încerc să fiu mai puțin intruziv și mai mult să corectez eventualele erori de subtitrare. Go!
My friend, so yeah, I'm not home and Wagner's rebellion.
Ok, nu este acasă, Alex. Ăsta presupun că este motivul pentru care nu apare pe imagine, doar pe voce. Așadar, eu o să fiu pe tura asta singura gazdă a dumneavoastră.
Lasted a good 24 hours. This is the 900 km.
Ok, scoatem subtitrarea ca să vedem traseul rebeliunii, lungime totală 900 de kilometri.
A road trip of Wagner's March of Justice.
Da? S-au retras din Donbass și acum o iau la picior prin Rusia.
Towards Moscow. And this is a good summary of what happened.
Vedem că aici au făcut și un ocol.
Wow, this has just been such a pleasure. I'm such a lucky boy.
Ok, this is such a pleasure. Sunt un băiat atât de norocos, dar mie mi-a plăcut mai mult mema cu Forrest Gump având fața lui Prigojin, da? Și el alerga, știți filmul, da? Și strânsese o turmă de adepți în spatele lui și la un moment dat acest Prigojin Forrest Gump se întoarce spre ei și le spune: sunt obosit, cred că mă întorc acasă. Tare, foarte tare.
I can't wait to go home.
Now you're probably wondering the reasons behind all this. Was it a psyop? Was it a real coup? Well, according to the Prigojin himself, it was some sort of armed
Cum mi-a spus Prigojin, așa i-a spus lui Prigojin.
protest because PMC Wagner was supposed to be disbanded on July 1st, 2023 due to some political intrigue. However, one thing that left me wondering was the statement from Prigojin the night of the insurrection. Our commander was behind the whole operation. He's the best strategist in the world, Dmitry Utkin. More on that later. But why would Russia want to disband Wagner? They flew from one victory to another. Now, this is where I'll start some speculations. The
Încep localitățile alea cu denumiri delicioase.
Wagnerians had been fighting very well in Ukraine. They won the decisive battle of Popasna, which opened up the Russian victories at Severodonetsk and
Severodonetsk,
Lysychansk. But it
Lysychansk.
became clear to Prigojin that his PMC was limited by numbers. They would need more people. So in July 2022, they started recruiting in prisons. And by the end of the summer, only 300 inmates had signed up.
Incredibil de puțin, doar 300.
It's really between September and November that Wagner stepped up its recruiting campaign. I think at first the Russian government let Wagner do their thing because they did not expect that many inmates to enlist. Think about it, Wagner went from approximately 8,000 fighters to a staggering 50,000 within a couple months.
Tare.
Wagner was not a little PMC anymore. It became an army. It's like if you wingman for one of your friends, help him with his game, and all of a sudden he gets all the girls from you. You're like, hold on, this is getting out of hands.
Deci, dacă înțeleg bine, hai mă, Prigojin i-a suflat puicuțele lui Șoigu. Urât, ce ai făcut? Prigojin, a?
And this is exactly what the Ministry of Defense thought of Wagner. And from this moment on, tensions kept increasing. We can assume that they feared that Prigojin would blackmail them, do this or that for me, or in march on Moscow. And in some strange coincidence, have a look at this interview between Prigojin and Wargonzo.
Da, ok, hai să ne uităm la Wargonzo, interviu cu Prigojin, foarte interesant, efectiv, sta să scot subtitrarea asta, că avem alta și Wargonzo îl întreabă ceva pe Prigojin. Băi, nu vi se dă muniție, știți că Prigojin tot timpul se plângea că, domne, nu are suficientă muniție de artilerie, da? Și Gonzo îi spune, nu vi se dă suficientă muniție, deoarece există temerea că v-ați putea deplasa cu artileria și ați ataca Kremlinul. Da? V-ați deplasa spre Moscova și Storm Kremlin, adică să-i ia pe ea la 3 păzești. Ok.
Раз вам не дают, потому что вы можете там пушки чуть ли не на Москву развернуть, пойти там Кремль штурмовать и так далее. Ну, такие опасения.
Astea sunt temerile, cât de reale sunt, a? Sau n-au niciun rost? Sunt nejustificate. Uitați-vă cum se uită Prigojin. Bună idee! Ia uitați-vă.
Pойдем ли мы в Москву?
Spune Prigojin. Să mergem spre Moscova? Let me think about.
Ну, вот они говорят, ну как они, вот типа оправдывают.
Da? Și Gonzo spune, domne, așa justifică e faptul că nu vă dau muniții.
Вся ЧВК Вагнера, вот они достигли уже такой автономии, у Пригожина такие политические амбиции.
Prigojin are atâtea ambiții politice și s-ar putea să-și ia, spune Gonzo, armata privată și să-și o desfășoare în jurul Kremlinului și să seize power, da? Să preia puterea politică în Rusia.
Вот сейчас он возьмет свою, значит, эту частную армию, развернет и захватит власть в России.
Да, Семен, смотри.
Hei, Gonzo, apropo de marșul spre Moscova de care spuneai tu, băi, este o idee interesantă. Mie nu mi-a trecut prin cap așa ceva.
Будут походы на Москву. Мысль интересная, но не думали.
Tare, nu?
Я не предлагал.
Нет,
Ai, nu o pune pe mine, zice Gonzo. N-am sugerat eu asta, nu.
Perhaps you can believe
Prigojin, da, m-ai sugerat. Ok, subtitrarea la loc. Distractiv. Foarte tare și acest episod. De
that from this
Alex.
moment on, the seed was planted in Prigojin's mind, and that he
Sămânța, ideea, a fost deja implantată în mintea lui Prigojin de către War Gonzo.
planned this exact thing as a last resort. In the end, all this turned into some personal beef.
Nu știu dacă știți clipul ăsta, da? Era la o fabrică de băuturi alcoolice din Bahmut, ok? Și a predat-o cu băutura neatinsă, ok?
Between Prigojin and Shoigu.
Ceea ce totuși, hei, nu ne-am fi gândit că niște ruși capturează așa comoară lichidă, bahică și o lasă, o predau cu inventarul făcut. Incredibil, nu? Se și justifica, domne, e o sticlă spartă, dar nu-i vina noastră. Și ați văzut că era tot peretele numai sticle. Shoigu și Prigojin.
As Wagner was winning the Battle of Bakhmut on its own, the Russian Ministry of Defense wanted to assert their dominance. To remind Prigojin who's the real boss, the first strike happened in February 2023, when the Russian government banned Wagner from recruiting in prisons. Perhaps they feared that Wagner would grow to an army of 100,000 men, a huge sausage fest, and nobody likes that. But this wasn't enough, because Wagner kept winning. And we can speculate that perhaps this is when the Ministry of Defense started holding off ammunition supplies at times. What's funny is that I was working on a video.
A început să-i dea muniție cu țărita. Bă, Prigojine, tu te descurci cam bine.
Just before the mutiny, and it sort of
Ia cunoașteți tu lungul nasului.
explained another aspect of this rebellion. For months now, the Russian High Command was restructuring its entire army, and they did notice the effectiveness of the Wagnerians. However, I suppose the Russian HQ didn't want an elite battle corps to hoard all the talent and knowledge for themselves. They didn't want a Waffen-SS within the Wehrmacht type of scenario. They wanted all the regiments to be of good quality by attaching experienced Wagnerian assault detachments to them. That's where the idea of
E un pic cam varză subtitrarea, dar esența ideii este că Ministerul Apărării dorea să implanteze trupe cu experiență de luptă în rândul altor formațiuni armate și să le răspândească astfel prin armata regulată a Rusiei pentru o infuzie de experiență și know-how, dar spunem cu capa, da?
of breaking down Wagner
Suntem acum vorbim despre ruși, nu?
must have appeared in late spring. That's how the Russian Ministry of Defense could strike two birds with one stone. On one hand, you remove the threat of Wagner pulling a
Da, deci, two birds with one stone este echivalentul expresiei românești a împușca doi iepuri deodată.
coup d'etat. And on the other, you increase the overall quality of Russian regiments. However, before we jump into the rabbit hole, let's go back to the timeline of this rebellion. Uprising, mutiny, whatever you call it. It all started with a so-called Russian missile strike on Wagner's base, which allegedly caused the death of 30 Wagnerians. In this video, we only see some burnt bushes somewhere in the middle of a forest, which, to be honest, is not very convincing. Then the people of
Nu pare a fi de mici cât să elimine 30 de muzicieni.
Rostov woke up with a bunch of Wagnerian Red Z tanks in the city center. Moments
Deci
later,
nu știu care e chestia cu Red Z. O fi ceva caracteristic Wagnerilor? Nu știu. Mă ajutați voi la comentarii și dacă tot v-ați oprit să comentați, nu uitați să apăsați și butonul like. Mulțumesc!
people recorded one of Wagner's columns going to the airfield east of Rostov and noted that they were equipped with Panzer air defense systems. Without firing a single shot, the musicians took control of the headquarters of the Southern Front in Rostov.
Acum nu m-aș hazarda. Da, au preluat controlul, dar mai degrabă ei și-au parcat mașinile și tancurile în fața instituției, că nu au întâmpinat rezistență, ok?
And here we can see Prigojin talking with Yevkurov, the deputy head of the main directorate of the general staff. And on the right side, General Vladimir Alexeyev, where Prigojin essentially said, "We'll go to Moscow until we get the chief of the general staff and Shoigu." Yet, this mutiny had its fair share of memes, like this girl taking graduation pictures with this Wagnerian T-90S in the background. Someone
Și nu orice tank. Wow.
said, "Uprising? First let me get some food." Rebel tanks might
Ce cu minte stătea la coadă, mă? Lasă, dă o vodculiță, că nu plecă la rebeliune pe burta
said,
goală.
"Uprising? First let me get some booze. Rebel tanks might be taking
Și asta
over,
e tare.
but the streets have to stay clean."
Corect, ce corect e corect. Ne respectăm, da? Rebeliune, nerebeliune, măturăm, da? Asta mă aduce aminte de o fază pe care Ursul de la Antena 3 o povestea cu nu știu ce filmare de pe vremea mineriadelor, când era haos pe stradă. În schimb era un românache de-al nostru care schimba tacticos roata de la Dacia 1300, da? Băi, eu am treabă de făcut, voi spărgeți-vă capetele pe acolo, nu e treaba mea. Da, hai și plantați și niște panseluțe când terminați. Tare.
Meanwhile, lightly armored columns of Wagnerians pushed north. They were spotted in the small town of Pavlovsk, south of the major city of Voronezh. In this video, we can count over 20 technicals, trucks, and buses filled with troops, as well as some armored vehicles. In the same sector, we could even see a tank on the trailer. Once again, with a technical
Da, pe distanțe mari, tancurile se transportă frumos, da? Pe trailer. Nu așa, consumă prea mult tancurile și nici nu dezvoltă cine știe ce viteză. Ori și cât coloana asta lui Wagner a avut o viteză de deplasare suspect de mare. Dar hai să ne oprim aici cu comentariile.
behind. Some old memories of Wagner on the African
Am
front.
spus trailer. Platformă. Ok.
So according to my estimate, this column would comprise of roughly 200 to 250 Wagnerian rebels. In multiple columns, they pushed another 100 kilometers north until they were stopped by the military police of Voronezh and were forced to bypass the city and do a 250-kilometer detour through the Lipetsk region until they got north of Voronezh.
Vedeți că n-a fost o călătorie atât de lină. Au fost unii care au spus, bă, nu pe aici.
Back on the main highway. Here we can see a column of this march of justice in Yilets. Information about the total number of vehicles and personnel in the column varies. Prigojin claimed that his 25,000 men were involved in this march on Moscow. However, people on the ground say 150 pieces of equipment. Others said 400 pieces in 4 separate columns. Or perhaps it was the same column spotted 4 times. In my opinion, it was closer to 150 vehicles, which according to my estimates would mean 1,500 Wagnerians involved in this operation. But
hai că aici este important să comentăm ceva, da? Pe data de 24 iunie, când urmăream și noi evenimentele la televizor, erau atâtea răcnete încât impresia era că toți cei 25.000 de muzicieni erau în marș spre Moscova cu toată tehnica de luptă pe care o puteau lua după ei. Dar ia uitați, par a fi fost mai degrabă 1500, hai 2000.
plus maybe a couple hundreds in Rostov, meaning that over 20,000 musicians of the orchestra
Majoritatea stăteau la umbrică, serveau o gustărică.
did not participate in this armed protest. Notice how they race at full speed along highways. Tanks and some infantry vehicles are transported on trailers. They don't garrison the cities they pass through. None of this would indicate the preparation of a coup. It seems Prigojin simply wanted to be heard by Putin. However, as you can imagine, involving tanks and machine guns in your protest can escalate really fast. This is when Putin addressed the
Un fel de mineriadă, dar cu tancuri, da? Cu sisteme de luptă anti-aeriană foarte tare.
nation.
То, с чем мы столкнулись, это именно предательство. Все, кто сознательно
Ok, îl mai traducem și pe Putin. Ok.
встал на путь предательства,
Cei care s-au îmbarcat în mod conștient pe calea trădării, preparând sau pregătind de fapt o rebeliune armată.
кто готовил вооруженный мятеж, встал на путь шантажа и терроризма.
Cei care au recurs la șantaj, chestie penală și asta, da? Și metode teroriste. Și știm cum procedează Rusia cu teroriștii, da? Nu prea ia prizonieri. Vor înfrunta inevitabila pedeapsă.
Политических методов понесут неминуемое наказание.
This is when key figures made videos asking Prigojin to stop and stated their support for the president, like this Cossack battalion commander or General Alexev. We even saw the intervention of General Surovikin.
Пока не поздно и нужно, и необходимо.
Înainte să fie prea târziu, este necesar și trebuie să te supui voinței și ordinelor
Это подчиниться воле
președintelui Federației Ruse, președinte ales de poporul rus. O treabă de asta.
приказу всенародно избранного президента Российской Федерации.
Oprește coloanele. Ok.
Остановить колонны, вернуть их
Și întoarce-le la locul lor de deployment, nu știu cum să traduc, am un lapsus. Da? Unde stăteau ele de obicei, da? Ok.
пункты
Întoarce-le acasă, bre.
постоянной дислокации и районы
Și
совмещения.
în zonele de concentrare a trupelor pe unde erau ele.
Overall, the population fully sided with President Putin, and many started tearing down Wagner's recruitment posters. In the countryside, tractors dug holes in the roads in order to halt PMC Wagner. Others used their trucks to form barrage. Here you can see how the PMC broke through one of such civilian checkpoints. It became clear that they were closing in on Moscow with little to no fighting on the ground.
Ce mișto este imaginea asta.
Most firefights seem to have been from Russian aircraft targeting the Wagner columns. And to everyone's surprise, Wagnerians fired back at these helicopters. The PMC, being only 300 kilometers south from Moscow, Russian law enforcement started taking positions along the Oka River, since there are only 5 bridges going over it in the sector. For example, they removed the bridge going across at Kolomna. Just in case, they brought reinforcements and prepared quick entrenchments in case of a firefight. Meanwhile, in the south, in Rostov, still no firefights. The mercenaries are just gelling. Here you can
chilling la terasă. Bine, băte!
See some of them at a local restaurant.
Mai adu 2 reci și cu guler. La restaurantul local numit, atenție,
Like this one called Meat Story. Yeah,
Meat Story, povestea, basmul cărnii.
Russian government reacted and sent some Chechens from Akhmat detachments towards Rostov. Hundreds of Chechen vehicles spread over kilometers waiting to intervene. Take a look at these construction workers carrying their shifts as a column of Chechen armored vehicles was entering Rostov to dislodge PMC Wagner. From a tactical perspective, the goal was to encircle the rebels and take the city into a pincer. At this moment, the Wagner PMC would have had to storm the bridges across the Oka River to reach Moscow, and in the south, perhaps engage in firefights against the Chechens
Eu n-am înțeles până la urmă ce au făcut cecenii ăia.
in Rostov. Without proper logistics, time was against Wagner. Meanwhile, the speech of the president and the destruction of Russian aircraft definitely scared Prigojin and convinced him that his operation was going too far and that they would lose anyway without Putin's support.
Da, și-a dat seama, bă, protest, marșul justiției, dar totuși, hai că au început să pice elicopterele. Nu-i bine.
And all of a sudden,
Plus, cel mai rău semn că lucrurile nu se desfășurau în sensul dorit e faptul că a ieșit Putin. Aoleo, greu așa.
as girls were preparing to go to bed and the boys fixed on their phones for another sleepless night on Saturday, June 24th, around 9 p.m.
Da? Deci băieții urmăreau cu interes evenimentele, dar băieții de la Slava urmăreau și cu șampaniile puse la reci. Numai că asta e, a trebuit să pună dopul la loc pentru că ghinion.
Wagner agreed to end the insurrection through a mediation with President Lukashenko from Belarus. And just like that, Prigojin ordered his columns to go back to the camps so that the Russian blood does not spill. Easy to say when reportedly 7 Russian aircraft were shot down by Wagner's air defense. According to the recent estimates, we're talking about roughly 13 KIA. Either Russia took Maskirovka to a whole new level or it wasn't a psyop. Anyway, in these videos you can see entire squads.
Adică circ, bă, dar totuși chiar așa au murit 13 oameni și să ne gândim niște oameni foarte bine pregătiți, adică nu poți să-i pregătești de pe o zi pe alta, niște piloți.
Wagnerian troops marching down the streets and preparing to withdraw from Rostov, surrounded by curious locals.
Să se tragă din Rostov ăla, da?
Even took time to salute them and take pictures. Or perhaps Wagnerians were just trying to snatch some new recruits. Many political analysts claimed at the end of this mutiny.
Da, iarăși mă bag puțin. Am văzut multe filmări, da, cu hândrălui de ăștia, tineri, gen 20-22 de ani. Fix ce trebuie. Aclamându-i pe aia, bravo, dă noroc cu ei, chestii de-astea. Făcând selfie-uri cu ei. Și mă gândeam, băiete, adică e și aproape de linia frontului, a? Hai, că tot a venit vacanța mare, n-ai ce face, nu mai ai cursuri la facultate, du-te și tu, dă o tură pe acolo și ajută. Ce vreau să subliniez este faptul că președintele Putin are aparent, din statistica mea făcută pe câteva imagini, un bazin mare de recruți de unde poate să-și întărească forțele în caz că va fi necesar.
Could not have been done without some backroom negotiations, some sort of deal. People expressed some rumors and possibilities. Number 1, criminal proceedings against Prigojin will be terminated. And Wagner PMC fighters will be...
Deci au promis lui Prigojin că nu îl vor urmări în justiție pentru rebeliunea armată sau ce a fost asta, da? Pentru marșul dreptății.
given immunity. So this one seems to have been...
Ok, și soldații lui vor fi și ei protejați, cei care au mărșăluit spre Moscova.
confirmed. Gerasimov and Shoigu will resign.
Opa! Ăștia doi vor demisiona, încă așteptăm să vedem dacă se întâmplă.
The current governor of Tula will replace Shoigu as Minister of Defense. Strangely, in the past day, we've seen more videos of Dumin pop up. where he's surrounded by members of the Russian armed forces. He's highly respected
Ok, ăsta ar fi înlocuitorul lui Shoigu.
in Russia because he played a key role in the annexation of Crimea. Most importantly, he's the former head of the GRU, the special forces of the main directorate of the General Staff. And surprise, surprise, like we've seen in this video I posted, most of Wagner's commanders are also former officers of the GRU. And this could explain why Prigojin said, "Our commander was behind the whole operation. He is the best strategist in the world," talking about the original Wagner,
Aoleu.
Dmitry Utkin. And what do we know about
Ăsta nu știu de ce cam are față de
him? Well, Utkin served as the commander of the 700 separate special detachments of the GRU. And guess who is also a former head of the GRU? That's right, General Alexeyev. Perhaps this entire rebellion was a power play between the GRU and the FSB. However, according to the latest news, Shoigu and Gerasimov are both still in position. From a political perspective, for Putin to dismiss his Minister of Defense after such an uprising would be a show of weakness, as it could open a Pandora's box. At the same time, the Russian government could also not be too harsh on the rebels, since
dacă îi schimbă, posibil să îi schimbe pe alte motive, da? Nu pentru că așa i-a cerut Prigojin, să spunem, cerut între ghilimele.
PMC Wagner is still extremely popular in Russia for the decisive role they played during the Battle of Bakhmut.
Bătălia de la Bakhmut, nu știu ce făcea subtitrarea aia, ia uitați-vă la tineretul, da? De la Rostov, presupun. Ia uitați-vă. Ăștia, toți ăștia.
Now last point. Wagner PMC troops will be incorporated and merged into the Russian armed forces. Peskov already announced that a lot of Wagnerians ended up signing contracts with the Ministry of Defense even before the rebellion. It was also noted
Deci începuseră să fie integrați muzicienii în armata regulată rusă, sau cum să-i spun eu.
that Wagner fighters that took part in the mutiny would not be allowed into the Russian armed forces. Strange coincidence, considering that in the last week,
Deci aia 1500-2000 nu vor fi incorporați în armată, dar li se va găsi o utilizare.
it was reported that Wagner was actively looking for foreign translators of Arabic and French. We can assume that Wagner will be sent back abroad for its PMC duties. You see, for government, it's better to have your PMC deployed abroad and do their thing far away from the capital. Meanwhile, according to the latest news, the construction of a military camp for PMC Wagner began in Belarus, in some forest in the Mogilev region. The first camp is allegedly planned in Osipovichi, 200 kilometers from the border with Ukraine, designed to house 8,000 people. I think this could be a base for sabotage and infiltration missions by Wagnerians across the border, just to push their tip north of Kyiv, forcing Ukraine to redeploy some much-needed troops there. At the same time, who knows how many Belarusians could enlist with Wagner in order to bolster their numbers. So in a way, Prigojin's mutiny was partially successful, as the Wagner Corps was not entirely disbanded. Another thing that I thought was interesting that went relatively unnoticed is something that Poroshenko, the former president of Ukraine, said. He claims that Ukraine went through similar things between 2014 and 2016. Remember, during the first days of the war in Donbass, Ukraine had basically no standing army. Many volunteers formed their own units, and this is where Ukrainian oligarchs raised and funded their own regiments that were naturally growing more and more powerful. Poroshenko eventually ordered to clean up all these semi-independent units and forcefully subordinate them directly to the armed forces of Ukraine. Once again, done for political reasons. Like we saw, one of the root causes of the mutiny of the Wagner Corps could also be the reorganization of the Russian army. In the recent weeks, we heard more and more about Russian Storm Z units. On June 19th, south of Marinka, Russian Telegram
Storm Z. Ok, interesant.
reported that crack troops, including the new specially trained Storm Z units, have been introduced with great success.
Unități de asalt Z, ok?
On June 20th, it was reported that the Russian Storm Z battalion had taken a forest near Makarivka. The same day, the Ukrainians captured one of these Storm Z fighters who claims to have never fought in his life. On June 20th again, the ISW wrote, "The recent commitment of Storm Z units to the Kharkiv-Luhansk Oblast front line likely explains the increased number of attacks reported near Kremina over the previous few days, as it appears that Russian forces have committed a relatively large quantity of low-quality forces to frontal infantry assaults." Very interesting how they never use such words to describe Ukrainian territorial defense brigades, but yeah, that's another topic. And here again, Ukrainians reported that
Oricum, ăia cu trupele teritoriale sau ce sunt de la ucraineni, ăia sunt în general nu pentru asalt, ci pentru a păstra terenul, teritoriul cucerit de alte trupe mai de calitate.
enemy Storm Z units have been attempting to storm the positions of the Ukrainian armed forces near Kupiansk. What are these Storm Z units anyway? Essentially a copy-paste of Wagner's assault detachments. Because after banning Wagner from recruiting in prisons, the Russian Ministry of Defense did it themselves on May 31st.
Deci, cu alte cuvinte, și mai puține, rușii își fac propriilor Wagneri de acum încolo, da?
It was said that the State Duma was going to legalize the recruitment of prisoners in the Russian army during the war. However, as opposed to Wagner's 6-month contracts, the Moscow Times claims that recruited inmates would only be released from service at the end of the war.
The worst.
Mamă, ce e asta, frate? Da, la sfârșitul războiului, și dacă războiul durează 15 ani, am zis o cifră la întâmplare, a? Adică, greu de semnat așa ceva.
Deal I think I've ever seen negotiated.
And not surprisingly, according to Wikipedia, only 2,000 have enlisted so far.
Bă, tot e bine că s-au alăturat 2000. Țineți minte, da? Wagner anul trecut, până la sfârșitul verii, nu a înrolat decât 300 de oameni. Deja 2000 pare o cifră respectabilă.
However, this number might be underestimated because Russian newspaper Verstke claims that the Ministry of Defense actually recruited 15,000 prisoners. Here they interviewed some of them attached to the 71st Regiment as they hold frontline positions. Ukrainians say those are low-quality troops. The Russians say they're crack units. Truth probably lies in the middle. In my opinion, inmates and new recruits are combined with more experienced troops in order to form Storm Z assault battalions. And this is where the Ministry of Defense probably had Wagner in mind. These experienced troops could be Wagnerians. We can suppose that by signing contracts with the Ministry of Defense, Wagnerians would join these Storm Z units and essentially train Russian soldiers. From what I read, the main goal was to spread them out throughout the front, disseminating their new tactics to the rest of the Russian troops, incorporate them in every regiment into a joint effort. These assault detachments, either companies or battalions, would then be attached to every Russian regiment in order to beef up their offensive capabilities. But that's a topic for another video. My friend.
Ok, asta a fost tot. Vai, dar ce brusc s-a sfârșit. Nu-i nimic, fac eu închiderea, mulțumindu-vă celor care ați dat like, vă aștept la comentarii, vă rog să vă abonați care nu sunteți abonați și încă o dată mulțumiri pentru susținere pe Patreon și ca membri ai canalului noapte.